The morning my son-in-law told me I was making their lives harder by being in them, I was standing in the driveway of a house I had quietly kept afloat for 4 years, holding a casserole dish wrapped in a dish towel that still smelled like my kitchen. The garage door was half open, the way it always was on Sunday afternoons when they expected me to drop things off. But they did not expect me to hear what was said on the other side of it. I had arrived a few minutes early. That was my mistake, apparently. My daughter was inside, somewhere toward the back of the house, and my son-in-law was on the phone near the garage. His voice carried the way voices do in open spaces, easy and unguarded, the way people sound when they believe no one important is listening. "She's always just showing up," he was saying. "It's like she thinks being useful means she belongs here. Mom, honestly, the woman doesn't know her place." I stood on the concrete with that casserole dish warming my palms, and I did not move. Not because I was frozen. Because some part of me had been waiting, without knowing it, for a very long time to hear something that honest. He turned and saw me through the gap. His expression didn't collapse into guilt the way you might expect. It shifted into something more practiced, an adjustment rather than a reckoning. He ended the call and looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they've grown tired of. "Dorothy," he said, "we weren't expecting you this early." "Clearly," I said, and I handed him the casserole dish, turned around, and walked back to my car. I drove home to Savannah on a road I had taken hundreds of times, past the live oaks draped in Spanish moss, past the little bakery on Whitaker that had been there since my children were small. I did not cry. I drove the way you drive, when something inside you has gone very still, not numb, but quiet, in the way a decision is quiet before it is spoken aloud. My name is Dorothy Caldwell. I taught middle school English for 31 years in Chatham County, and I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed. I retired at 63 with a pension that was modest but mine. I owned a small house on the east side of town with a porch that caught the afternoon light and a garden I had tended for over 2 decades. By any honest measure, my life was full. But somewhere along the way, full had started meaning available, and available had become expected. My daughter Claire had married Raymond Holt 6 years ago. He was handsome in a careless sort of way, the kind of man who always seemed to be performing competence rather than practicing it. I had tried, in the years since their wedding, to find the good in him that Claire clearly saw. I brought food. I kept the grandchildren on weekends. I said yes when asked, and sometimes before I was asked, because that is what I had always done, and because I believed, the way mothers often do, that generosity would be met with grace. It had not been. When I got home that evening, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat at the kitchen table without turning on a light. The late Georgia's sun came through the window at a low angle, laying gold across the old wood. I sat in it like a woman warming herself at a fire she had almost forgotten she could build. Then I opened the drawer beside the sink. I kept a folder there, the kind with the elastic band that snaps satisfyingly when you pull it. I had put it together 18 months ago, during a stretch of weeks when something in the back of my mind had begun keeping score, quietly, without my full permission. I had not let myself look at it honestly until now. I laid the papers out across the table, one by one, the way you lay out a hand of cards you've been holding too long. The mortgage gap payments, every month for 4 years, the difference between what Raymond's income could cover and what the bank required, wired quietly from my savings account to theirs. The car note for Claire's SUV, because Raymond said the dealership offer was time-sensitive and they were a little short. The emergency dental bill for my granddaughter Lily, which I had been glad to cover, genuinely glad until I saw the Airbnb charge from that same weekend, a beach house in Tybee Island for Raymond and his college friends. The private school enrollment deposit for both grandchildren, the summer camp fees, the after-school tutoring for my grandson Marcus, the subscription boxes Raymond called investments in the kid's development. I counted them, methodically, the way I used to grade papers, careful not to let feeling interfere with accuracy. 94 separate payments over 4 years. The total at the bottom of my handwritten column made me set the pencil down. It was more than twice my annual pension. I looked around the kitchen. The linoleum near the back door had been lifting for 2 years. The ceiling fan in the living room made a clicking sound every third rotation that I had learned to tune out. I had not replaced the water heater that the plumber told me was past its life expectancy, because the month he told me that was the same month I covered Lily's dental work and Claire's car registration and a vet bill. Raymond said they simply could not handle right then. I had been living carefully, quietly, on the edges of my own life, so that theirs could be lived in the center. Raymond's voice came back to me, clear as anything. She doesn't know her place. For the first time, sitting at that table in the dying light, I felt the anger arrive fully. Not the quick hot kind, the kind you cry through and apologize for later. This was the slow-burning kind, the kind that steadies your hands instead of shaking them. I closed the folder, snapped the elastic band back into place. Tomorrow, I decided, was going to be a very different kind of day. I arrived at First Coastal Bank when the doors opened at 9. I had banked there since before Claire was born, and the branch manager, a tall, soft-spoken man named Gerald Okafor, had processed my accounts through retirement paperwork, my husband's estate, and a dozen other moments that required someone to be both efficient and kind. He was good at both. He saw me come in and waved me to his office with the particular expression people use when they sense that something has shifted in a person they know well. I placed the folder on his desk and folded my hands in my lap. "Gerald," I said, "I need to make some changes. All recurring transfers to Claire and Raymond's joint account. I need them stopped. Every one." He looked at me for a moment before opening the folder. His eyes moved down the first page, then the second. His expression did not change, but his posture shifted slightly, the professional equivalent of a long breath. "All 94?" he said. "All 94. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they want to choose their next words carefully. "Dorothy, this will affect their mortgage. And a number of recurring bills. I know what it will affect," I said. "That's why I'm here early." He began entering the cancellations into the system. For a few minutes, the only sound was the soft percussion of his keyboard and the faint hum of the branch coming awake around us. Then he paused. His brow changed in a way that made me sit up slightly. "Dorothy," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register that told me to pay attention. "There's a flag on your home equity account. A request was submitted last week to add an authorized user." He looked up. The name submitted was Raymond Holt. The room felt very still. "Was that you?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "It was not." Gerald's jaw tightened. "The request was denied automatically because it didn't route through your verified contact information, but it was a formal submission. Someone had your account number." I sat with that for a moment. Raymond had not simply been waiting for me to keep helping. He had been preparing to help himself. "I want a fraud alert on every account," I said. My voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. "Lock the home equity line. Remove Raymond Holt's name from anything it appears on. Change every security credential. And I'd like a written record of that access attempt." Gerald was already typing. "You'll have everything by end of day," he said. "Dorothy, I'd also recommend you speak with an attorney. What was attempted here may have legal implications." "I already have one in mind," I said. And I did. My friend Harriet's daughter had been a family law attorney for 15 years. I had her card in my purse. When I stepped out of the bank, the Savannah morning had opened up into one of those clear sky days that makes the city look like a painting of itself. The magnolias along Bull Street were thick with late blooms. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Then my phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Hey, Mom. Netflix says payment declined. Can you check your card?" I put the phone in my bag and kept walking. By noon, there were 11 messages. The first few were from Claire, asking about Netflix, then the grocery delivery account, then the school tuition portal. Her tone was curious, slightly impatient. The way you sound when you assume a problem is someone else's oversight. Then Raymond started texting. His messages had a different quality from the beginning, not confused, calculating. "Dorothy, the mortgage auto payment didn't process. This needs to be fixed today. Dorothy, I'm not sure what's going on, but you need to call the bank. This is affecting our credit. I need you to handle this." I read them while eating lunch at my kitchen table. A bowl of tomato soup, a piece of toast, a glass of water. Simple things, tasted better than they had in a long time. I did not respond. By mid-afternoon, Claire's messages had changed. The curiosity had drained out of them and something raw had taken its place. "Mom, what is happening? Raymond says nothing is going through. Is everything okay with your accounts? Mom, please call me. Are you okay?" I noticed that none of the messages asked if I was okay before they asked about the accounts. That told me something I already knew but needed to see clearly. The call I had been waiting for came at 4:17. Claire's voice was taut when I answered, stretched thin between two feelings she hadn't yet sorted out. "Mom, what is going on?" "I made some changes at the bank today," I said. A pause. "What kind of changes?" I stopped the transfers. All of them. The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear her exhale. When she spoke again, her voice had a different texture, softer and more careful. "Why?" "Because, Claire, I've been making 94 monthly payments to support your household for 4 years. And yesterday, standing in your driveway, I heard your husband tell someone on the phone that I don't know my place." She didn't say anything. "I've decided he's right," I continued. "I'm going to take some time to find my place, starting with my own finances." "Mom, that's not Raymond didn't mean." She stopped, started again. "Things are tight right now, you know that. Your household brings in more than 6 figures, Claire. You have taken 2 international vacations in the last 18 months. Raymond bought a boat in April." I paused. Things are not tight. Things are prioritized. And I have not been one of the priorities. Her breath came out shaky. "So you're just cutting us off?" "I'm stopping something that was never supposed to be permanent," I said. "That's different." She hung up. I set the phone face down on the table and went out to water the garden. The roses along the back fence were doing well this year. I stood among them with the hose and let the sound of water cover everything else for a while. My neighbor from across the street, May, called out from her porch. "Dorothy, you look like a woman who made a good decision today." I laughed for the first time in longer than I could measure. "Working on it, May." That evening, I called Harriet's daughter and made an appointment for the following morning. I needed to understand what Raymond's access attempt meant legally, and I needed to make sure my will, my home, and my remaining accounts were protected in ways that didn't depend on anyone's goodwill. I also called my son, Daniel. He lived in Charlotte, worked in logistics, and had always had a different relationship with money than his sister. Having learned early that I did not have more than I needed and spending accordingly, he listened without interrupting while I told him what had happened. "Mom," he said when I finished, "I've been worried about this for 2 years. I didn't know how to say it." "You could have said it," I told him. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't." That was the thing about Daniel. He apologized when he was wrong. It was a small thing and not a small thing at all. The next morning brought something I had not expected. I was on the porch with coffee when a car I didn't recognize pulled to the curb. My granddaughter Lily got out. She was 17, tall like her father but with Claire's eyes, and she was carrying a paper bag from the bakery on Whitaker. She walked up to the porch steps and stopped, looking at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed. "Grandma," she said, "can I sit with you?" "Always," I said. She sat in the wicker chair beside me and set the bag on the little table between us. Inside were 2 almond croissants, my favorite, which she knew because she had asked me once and remembered. She didn't speak for a moment. She looked out at the garden, at the roses, at the fat bumblebee working its way across a late bloom. "Things are bad at home," she said finally. "I imagine they are. Dad is saying you're being vindictive, that you're punishing the family because of something he said that got taken out of context." She paused. "Mom isn't saying much. She's just kind of quiet, which is almost worse." I waited. Lily pulled her knees up to her chest. She was still young enough to do that in a chair and look natural. "I found something, Grandma." I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the printer cable in Dad's office, and there were papers on the desk. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. I took pictures because I didn't know what I was looking at. But then I looked it up. She handed me the phone. On the screen were photos of documents. My name appeared on several lines. There were figures I recognized: the assessed value of my house, the remaining balance I had confirmed just 2 weeks ago when I'd called about refinancing inquiries. Someone had pulled a detailed profile of my home equity. Below that, in handwriting I did not recognize, were notes, numbers, calculations, a lender's name I did not know. Raymond had not only tried to access my home equity account at the bank, he had been researching how much could be borrowed against my house. He had been building a case, quietly, for using my home as collateral for something I would never have agreed to, and arranging it in a way that might have committed me before I understood what I had signed. I handed the phone back to Lily. My hands did not shake. Something had moved past the point of shaking. "Thank you for showing me this," I said. "Grandma." Her voice broke just at the edges. "I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't know any of the payments. I didn't know he was doing this." "I swear." "I believe you," I said, and I did. She wiped at her eye with her sleeve, trying to be casual about it. "I got a job," she said, "at the plant nursery on Waters Avenue. I started last week. I'm going to pay for my own gas and my own phone plan." She lifted her chin slightly, the way people do when they've made a decision that costs them something. "I don't want to be like that." I looked at this girl, 17 years old, sitting in my wicker chair with almond croissant crumbs on her jacket, and I felt something open in my chest that had been closed for a very long while. "I know you don't," I said, "and you won't be." I sent Lily home with the rest of the croissants and the assurance that I loved her, which was simpler and more complete than anything else I could offer. Then I called the attorney's office and moved my appointment up. By the end of that week, the picture had become fully clear. My attorney confirmed that what Raymond had attempted was legally actionable. "Not a gray area," she said. "A deliberate effort to access financial instruments attached to my name, without my knowledge or consent." She recommended I file a formal report, and I did. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a careful distance as the scaffolding of their life began to sway. A friend mentioned seeing the boat listed for sale online. The private school sent a past due notice that Claire, apparently not knowing I would hear about it, asked a mutual acquaintance about payment plans. Raymond's name appeared in a community group post about a business venture that had gone quiet suddenly, the kind of quiet that follows a problem no one wants to explain. I did not feel satisfaction exactly. What I felt was more like the relief that comes when you stop holding your breath. I painted the back porch that month, a deep cream color that made the garden look brighter. I hired someone to fix the linoleum by the back door and replace the water heater. I bought myself a quilt at the artisan market downtown, hand-stitched, expensive in a way that would once have made me put it back. I carried it home and spread it across the foot of my bed and felt no guilt at all. Daniel came down from Charlotte for a long weekend. We cooked together, drove out to Tybee, sat on the beach in October light, and talked the way we hadn't talked in years. He told me things about his own life I hadn't known. I told him things about mine. We were, I realized, people to each other in a way that the busy scaffolding of family obligation had prevented for too long. I should have come more, he said. You're here now, I said. Claire came to me about 6 weeks after the bank visit. Alone, without warning, on a Thursday evening. She knocked this time, which told me something had shifted. I opened the door and stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table, in the same chair Lily had used, and she looked smaller than I expected, and very tired. There were things in her face that had not been there a year ago, or maybe I simply hadn't let myself see them. She did not make excuses for Raymond. That was the first thing that surprised me. I've been talking to a therapist, she said. She's been helping me understand some things. She looked at her hands. About what I allowed, and what I told myself it was. I poured 2 cups of tea and sat down across from her. Mom, she said, I don't expect you to pretend it's fine. What he did, what we were doing, I know what it cost you. Her voice was careful, measured in a way that told me she had thought about this. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. And I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter. She was 51 years old. She had her father's jaw and my stubbornness, and a life she was going to have to rebuild from more honest materials. I could not hand her the pieces, but I could sit at the table while she sorted them. You can call me, I said. Not for money, for conversation, for Sunday dinners when you're ready. But Claire, the next chapter has to look different. She nodded. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't apologize for it. I know, she said. I want it to. She left an hour later. I stood at the door and watched her car until it turned the corner. Then I went inside and stood at the kitchen window for a while, watching the garden in the dark, the outline of the roses barely visible against the fence. I was not the woman who had driven home from that driveway 3 months ago. That woman had been quietly disappearing for years, had been making herself smaller to make room for people who had never been asked to do the same. She had confused love with maintenance and sacrifice with devotion. I understood the difference now. The following Sunday I baked a sweet potato pie and ate a slice of it sitting on my porch in the late afternoon sun, with the quilt across my lap and a novel I had been meaning to read for 2 years open in my hands. The neighborhood was quiet in the way it gets in November, the deep-settled quiet of things winding down toward winter. May waved from across the street. I waved back. My phone was on the table beside me, face up. Lily had texted that morning. Got my first real paycheck, Grandma. Taking myself to lunch. With a small photograph of herself, grinning at a corner table somewhere, a sandwich in front of her, and a look on her face like someone who had done something they were proud of. I had looked at that photograph for a long time before I put the phone down. There is something that happens when you stop rescuing people who have not asked to be saved, only assumed they would be. The noise quiets. The space that was always yours comes back to you. You realize that the ache you mistook for purpose was simply the weight of things that were never yours to carry. I had given generously for a long time. That was not a thing to be ashamed of. Generosity is not the mistake. The mistake is letting generosity become the only language you know, the only proof you offer of your worth. I was 67 years old. I had a garden and a porch and a pension and a son who called every Sunday. I had a granddaughter who was learning what it felt like to stand on her own 2 feet, and a daughter who was, slowly and painfully, beginning to do the same. I had a water heater that worked, and a quilt that cost more than I would have once allowed myself to spend, and a sweet potato pie that I did not have to share with anyone who had not earned a seat at my table. The light shifted across the porch, the way it does at that hour when afternoon starts to become evening, golden and low and full of something that takes a long time to name. I turned the page and kept reading. Some things you spend decades learning, and some things you understand all at once, on a quiet Sunday in November, with the smell of pie still warm in the house behind you, and the knowledge, settled now and certain, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. In your own life, on your own terms, whole.